Let's talk about communication. And first of all, the importance of communication. Communication is everything. And it's so easy to miscommunicate ideas, isn't it? I mean, think about texting, for example. When people text, a lot of times the emotion is gone unless you put a smiley face or something like that. But a lot of times the emotion is gone. So it's really difficult to tell if someone's joking or if they're serious or really what's going on just by reading a text. And a lot of the communication, the actual meaning gets lost. Well, you would think that while two people are talking face to face, that the communication would be 100%. I mean, after all, you can see what's going on. You can see facial expressions. You can hear voice inflection. You can of course, hear the information they're saying. You can hear any pauses, and there are a lot of things that you can pick up on. But even in that case, humans will find a way to miscommunicate and to misunderstand each other. Also, sometimes people talk two different languages. Sometimes one person's talking more of an emotional language, the other person's talking more of a business language. So there are all kinds of ways to mess up communication. What I want you to be sure of is that your communication is precise with your client, and it's your responsibility because they've hired you. It's your responsibility to make sure that you are communicating properly with them. Now, sometimes you're going to have clients and you're going to realize that you'll never see eye to eye. That's different. If you don't see eye to eye with someone, if you don't really agree with everything they say, that's different from communication. You can still communicate with them. You can still get across what you're talking about. And by the way, your opinions don't matter unless they are part of what's going to help that company function better. But if you have an opinion about something, if you think, wow, that's a really bad idea, then your opinion doesn't matter unless that really bad idea is crippling the company somehow. Then you have an obligation to bring it up. But realize the importance of communication. Your communication should be very to the point and should be very clear to them. Now, sometimes when you deal with certain clients, they're going to want more of a relaxed communication. They're going to want to get to know you. They're going to want to sit and relax with you and talk with you and so forth. That's okay, as long as you understand that that's what the client wants. Now, if you are trying to create that situation and they don't want it, then there can be a little bit of a challenge, a little bit of a conflict. Remember, they are in charge, so what they want goes. However they want to communicate is how it should happen. But make sure that no matter what happens, your communication is clear. They understand exactly what you are saying, and you understand exactly what they're saying. If there's ever a doubt about what they're saying, or if you ever have a doubt that they received what you are saying and understand it, then make sure you clarify it before moving on. Let's talk about scheduling communication. Sometimes with your clients, you're going to have to schedule communication. You're not always going to have the opportunity to walk up to them and say, hey, Jill, what you need to do is this, and here's what we're going to work on. Sometimes they're going to be really busy, and they're going to want to schedule time to talk with you, schedule time to communicate with you. If that's the case, make sure that you schedule it. Don't let things go on for days or weeks or months without communicating with them. If they're not communicating with you, there's a good chance that they don't really know what you're doing. And if they don't really know what you're doing, they could be thinking that you're not doing your job. And if they think you're not doing your job, then all sorts of negative things can happen. So you want to make sure that you are in communication with them. Let them know what's going on in the business that you are helping to develop or build, or their career that you're helping to develop or build. Give them reports about what you're doing. Always a great idea to give them reports about what's going on. If they just said, hey, come in here and fix this business, here's your office, ready to go, then you need to report to them and say, well, here's what I did for you this week. Here's the value that I added to your company this week. If they're not getting that, and they just think you're out there doing something, well, eventually they're going to get the idea that whatever it is you're doing can be done without. I remember when I was a kid, I had a transistor radio, and I opened up the back of it, and I saw the stuff in it. all these little circuits and everything. And I started taking things out. I started thinking, how can all this really be needed? And I took out a few things, and oddly enough, the radio still worked without those things. And I took out more things, and the radio still worked. And I was surprised. I took out about 5 different components, and the radio still worked fine. Those were extra components. They apparently weren't necessary. Maybe they were on some level. Maybe there's something the radio couldn't do anymore, but I was taking things out, and it was still working. I looked inside, and I started taking things out. That's what businesses do. They look inside every now and then, and they say, what do all these components do? What's this one doing? Let's take it out and see what happens. And so they fire someone, and they see what happens. If nothing happens, they fire someone else. If nothing happens, they fire someone else. They keep doing that, and if the company keeps functioning at full speed, they feel okay with that. So make sure that you let them know. It's kind of like if I had opened up that radio and that component said, hey, Steve, I'm in charge of the radio staying on, or I'm in charge of picking up AM frequencies. Without me, you won't be receiving AM frequencies. If I had seen something like that, I wouldn't have taken the component out. I wouldn't have even tested it. So make sure that you schedule communication and let them know what's going on. Let's talk about the different types of communication that you can have. Well, one is email. Email communication is wonderful. Now, as I've said, you can lose a little bit in communication with typing things, such as texting. You can lose a little bit of information if you go that route because people will not be able to see emotion usually in that, or if you're making a joke, they sometimes won't get it. A lot of fights happen because of emails, because people don't realize that other people are joking, email and texting. But email is a great way to communicate. Stay in touch. Let them know what's going on in their business. Let them know how things are moving along, or what needs to be changed, or what needs to be talked about, or what you're not sure of. And that's a big area, letting them know what you're not sure of. Just send an email. If you have a question about something, you're not sure how to do it, don't just put it aside. Don't just set it aside and ignore it. Let them know that you don't know what it even means or how to do it, or it's never been talked about. Let them know and make sure that you get some information from them. Now, I'm in business and I run an organization that helps people with hypnotherapy and neurolinguistic programming and life coaching, and we have programs for all of those things. And there are a lot of people working for me in various capacities. Sometimes I deal with other companies who distribute my products. When I do that, sometimes I'll send emails to them. Sometimes I won't get emails back. They'll either ignore it, or they're too busy, or something happens and I won't get an email back. When that happens, I get upset and I get a little frustrated because I think I should get an email back right away, because that's the way I do things. When I get an email, I send it back right away. Usually within 5 minutes of reading it, I send an email back, but that's just my style. That doesn't mean it's right or wrong. That's just my style. Realize that some people will take a few days to get back to an email. They'll prioritize, and that's okay. You need to realize the email communication style of the person you're working with. If you're working with someone who is going to email you back right away, that's great. If they're going to take 3 days, that's fine also, as long as it's not something urgent. If it is, you can call them, which we'll talk about next. But if they're going to take a few days, then you know how they communicate. And that means they don't want to change. And if you work for them, then you shouldn't try to change them. You should work within that framework. So realize that communication is important, but you also need to understand how the person who hired you wants to communicate. Let's talk about phone. Phone is the best way of communication, and so many people avoid it these days, and I'm sure it's going to get worse as we go, because people want to keep things impersonal. They just want to send an email or a text or something like that. Goodness knows what technology will come up next, but it'll probably be even less personal than that. There's a technology now that just recently came out where you can dictate a text. You can talk into a cell phone and it will turn it into a text and send it to the person. So you're talking, but it's making it impersonal. And it actually does very well. The software is surprisingly accurate. I was shocked by it, actually. But all of that becomes really impersonal. Phone, in my opinion, is the second best way to communicate. The best would be face-to-face. Go there, talk to them face-to-face, find out what's going on, but when you talk to them face to face, you really get everything. But phone will be the second best. When you have the opportunity to talk to them by phone, doesn't mean you always should use it though. Sometimes if you call someone 10 times a day, you're going to find yourself no longer working for them because they don't want to be bugged. If you become a nuisance to someone, they've hired you and you just become a nuisance to them, you're calling them all the time. Whereas you could be emailing them once a day, putting everything into one email, you are potentially going to find yourself unemployed soon, at least for that person. So what I suggest is that you always figure out which way they want to communicate. Maybe they want to always communicate by phone. But what I suggest when in doubt is that you try email first, use email first, and then for the important things, for the urgent things, you use phone communication, because the phone is something that causes them to stop what they're doing. Whatever they're doing, they have to stop it. Your call becomes the only thing that's going on in their universe at that moment, unless they're multitasking. But even then, they have to temporarily stop what they're doing to answer your call. So you've announced that whatever I have to say to you right now is more important than anything else in your universe right now. You've taken center stage and the spotlight is on you. It better be good, because people who hire you are usually going to be very busy. So I suggest that unless you're working with someone who really likes communicating on the phone, that you use that as a backup option, because email can say so much in such a concise way and save them time, and they don't have to be looking at it right when you're sending it. They can do it later, whereas a phone call has to happen right now or the call is missed. Let's take a look at in-person, which is my favorite way of communicating with someone, as I've said. Now, just because it's my favorite way, and I believe it's the absolute best way, doesn't mean it's the way that you should communicate with them all the time. For example, if you've been hired by someone and you're working either in their office or in an adjoining office, and it's easy for you to go to them and say, "Hey, Jill, what do you think about this?" It doesn't mean that Jill wants you to communicate in that way. You need to make sure you understand what the rules are. And sometimes the rules aren't spelled out. Sometimes you'll just understand it over time. Sometimes, even if you're in the same office as the person, they would rather have you communicate by email, putting everything in a concise way, or maybe they want you to communicate by text or something else, or leaving them notes, rather than talking to them one-on-one, because they may be on the phone a lot, or they may be doing something else in their minds that they really don't want you to interrupt. So you need to make sure you understand how they want to communicate. And even when in person seems like the best and most logical and most efficient way to do things, I know because that's the way I think. When I'm in person with someone, I think, why not just talk to them now? It doesn't always mean it's the right thing to do. And it doesn't always mean that it's what they want you to do. Remember, there's the right way and there's a wrong way, and you can throw both of those right out the window, because they don't matter. Your job is to do it the way that they want you to do it. That's the way, that's the right way in that situation. The only exception to that is when you see that things aren't really working. Remember, that's why you're there, to fix things, to make them better, to make them flow more smoothly. So when you realize that something, even in communication, isn't working with their right way, it is your job to point that out. And you have to do this in a very nice way. When you're saying, hey, the system's kind of silly, doesn't really work very well, you need to find a way to phrase that that's going to allow you to keep your job. It's going to allow you to stay in the good graces of the company. Because on the one hand, it's your obligation to point out any shortcomings of the company. On the other hand, it's your obligation to not get yourself out of employment. So you want to make sure that they understand what's going on in a nice way. So all this gets us back to our conversation about talking in person. It is the best way to communicate, in my opinion, but best is in quotation marks, because best is not always the best if that person or that company does not prefer that form of communication. So always keep in mind what they want, and you'll get a strong sense of this pretty soon when you start working for someone. Let's talk about Skype. Skype is something that I was recently introduced to, and it's been great. One thing I noticed about Skype, and I know it's going to change over time and maybe even change names eventually, but Skype is a program on a computer that allows people to communicate with each other. And it offers a number of advantages over both phone and text that people really like. Number one, it offers you video conferencing. You can talk to someone and you can see them. Number two, it's free. You don't have to pay for the calls. I can call New Zealand right now and it will be free. I can talk to someone for a long time and there will be no charge. It's wonderful. So you can talk to someone and you can see them. Again, just because it's great doesn't mean that it's preferred. When I first started using Skype, I realized that you can press a little button that says something like dial or call. You can actually call the person. They'll hear a ringing on their computer and they can answer it or not. I thought that's the way people communicated with Skype. You just get on there and you press the call button and it calls them and you talk with them and then you have a video conference with them. Initially I didn't realize that this is not the way Skyping is usually done. This type of communication through a computer is usually done just by sending a message, just by typing it in and it pops up on their computer screen. That's the normal way to Skype, not having it ring. They have to answer, they have to talk to you, hear your voice, they have to see a video of you. That's not the normal way to do it. So you need to realize that even though you have this powerful tool, you don't always need to take advantage of all the bells and whistles that it offers. But Skype is a wonderful way to communicate. And a lot of people now, and again, this will change over time. There'll be other programs that come around, and Skype even may change names and the technology may improve. But usually, people have Skype opened on their computer desktop all day long. And when someone wants to communicate with them, they just type in something and it pops right up. It's better than email because it doesn't get lost in the shuffle. You know, when you get email, you'll get not just one email from the person you want to hear from, you'll get 200 emails. Sometimes I'll get 200 emails in an hour or less. There's one email in there that I really want to see, which is what Joe just sent me. He said, hey, I'm going to send you an email. Well, it's buried somewhere in there. And so then I have to search by name and so forth and find it. Whereas Skype, I've only got a few friends on Skype, a handful. And when they communicate with me on Skype, I know it's one of the people who is one of my close friends or business associates. And so it's priority. And when it's priority, it makes a little noise on my screen that Skype makes, and I see it and I can take care of it right away. So in many ways, it's preferable to email because it's right away. But keep in mind that it is in their face and it is somewhat intrusive. So always keep that in mind. What about Instant Messenger? Instant Messenger is something which may eventually be replaced by programs like Skype, or it may have to improve. But when I say Instant Messenger, what I mean is something that's a little less than Skype. It doesn't have the interactivity at the level that Skype does, meaning the video conferencing. Instant Messenger is kind of like texting on a computer. That's the way I'm using the term anyway. So it's kind of a step down. In fact, a lot of times people use Skype as an instant messenger because, as I've mentioned, they don't want to have the video interaction or the audio interaction of hearing a voice or having to communicate like that. Instant Messenger is great because of that, because it eliminates the need for video and so forth. And when you call someone on Skype, they have to answer right away, or the call is missed, or it continues ringing. But in Instant Messenger, a message can just sit there. So I recommend using this or using Skype in this manner because it's something that becomes asynchronous, meaning they can get back to it when they want to. However, it's still priority because it's on their desktop. It's something that they're seeing. It's something that's not going to get buried in email. However, because it's asynchronous, because they don't have to talk right when you want to talk, then it's great. Now, a phone will be synchronous. It has to happen at the same time. When someone calls you and talks to you, let's say they call you and they say, hello, it's not as if you're just going to sit there on the phone for 5 minutes and then say hello back whenever you get around to it. That's the way instant messenger works. It's asynchronous. Doesn't have to happen at the same time. Whereas a phone call is synchronous. If you say hello to someone and they don't say hello back within a few seconds, you're probably going to say hello again. And if they still don't say hello, you're going to hang up. Whereas with instant messenger, if you say hello, you can let it sit there for an hour, knowing that they're busy. And if it were priority, you would call them anyway, and they can get back to it when they want to. So communicating with your client using this type of technology can be great. But again, it all goes back to how they want to communicate. I just want you to see the different types of communication so that you can realize how many options that you have and you can choose the right one or ones for the situation. Let's talk about reading between the lines. You're going to have to read between the lines in many cases. Now, some of your clients are just going to spell it out for you. They're going to say, I want my coffee in the morning. And sometimes, yes, as a life coach, you will be bringing people coffee, believe it or not, and that's okay. I don't want you to have this idea of you being above and beyond everything, unless you eventually get to the point where you're very successful and you have some rules ahead of time before they work with you that you spell out and you say, hey, take it or leave it. I don't fix coffee. If you don't like that, then don't hire me. But in many cases, at least when you're starting out, you'll be required to do a lot of things. You may be the butler, the baker, the candlestick maker when you first start out. All kinds of things may be thrown at you, and that's okay. Essentially, you're there as a life coach. You're there to make things happen. But realize that sometimes things are going to be thrown at you. Maybe they'll have kids and you'll have to watch their kids for a few minutes every day. Who knows? I don't want you to have the stance that anything is beyond you. If you do, you're going to limit yourself. Now, eventually, I really would like to see you define your job more and more as you get clients, as you can, as we say, cherry pick. When you cherry pick, you pick the cherries that you want, you leave the rest on the tree. That's cherry picking. Eventually, you'll be able to do that. Pick the clients you want, leave the rest alone. When you first start out, I suggest you get as many clients as you can as quickly as possible. That means bowing down a little bit. That means doing things that you don't really feel are within the job description of life coaching. That's okay, because you're building clients, you're building relationships that are going to tell other people about you. They're paying you money. You've got a job, you've got employment, you've got income coming in, you've got testimonials coming in. You're on your way. So pay your dues. Start out in the mailroom, as they say. Work your way up. Eventually you can cherry pick. But reading between the lines in communication is very important because you are going to have to really understand what your client wants from you. You're going to have to understand things that they don't even say. You're going to have to understand things that are not clearly expressed, things that are just kind of thrown out there. You're going to have to grab them. You're going to have to understand them. You're going to have to fill in the blanks. When things aren't spelled out clearly, it's your job to read between the lines and figure out what your job is. And this can be a challenge. And unfortunately, there's no rule about this. I'm not going to be able to tell you, hey, here's what this means, here's what that means, here's what the other thing means. You are going to have to figure it out. So stay sharp and always read between the lines and figure out what they want from you. How about knowing and understanding your client's needs? This has a lot to do with reading between the lines. You're going to have to know and understand your clients better than they know and understand themselves. And this isn't really as difficult as it may sound. It may sound like fortune telling or using ESP or something like that, but it's really not that tricky. You're going to be able to very quickly assess your clients after about 5 interactions with them. You're going to know what they're about, whether they're about money or helping people or whatever they're about. You're going to know what's lacking in their lives. You're going to know their blind spots, things about themselves that everyone else notices but that they don't see. You're going to see all that. And you're going to see a lot of things, some of which are going to be helpful that you're going to be able to use. Some of them are just going to be unfortunate things that you notice about them that you realize are probably never going to change, and that's okay. But knowing and understanding your client's needs is vitally important because Unless you know and understand their needs, you're not going to be able to figure out where you fit in. What can you do to make this situation better? You've always got to ask yourself that question. And that's what's going to keep you employed with them. Always asking yourself, what can I do to make this situation better? Part of that has to do with knowing and understanding your client's needs. If, for example, they are never on time, you can step in and be the person who reminds them, hey, you've got an appointment coming up in 10 minutes. It's a phone call. Be there. Or you've got to meet with so-and-so, or you've got to go get a haircut, or you've got to go do this, or meet your wife, or meet your husband, or what have you. If they're really not good with punctuality, then you can step in. Now, if you step in and they're still not good with it, then you've got to go to the next level, which is potentially talking with them, sharing with them about how you feel it might be hindering them, or just saying, forget that, it's not going to work, they're not going to change, and start working at it from a different angle. Perhaps scheduling things a half hour after they think they're supposed to be there. So they think they're supposed to be there at 1:30, let's say, and it actually doesn't start until 2. So you're kind of tricking them into being there a half hour early. I don't recommend you use that unless you have tremendous rapport with your client, but that is a strategy that has worked for life coaches in the past, scheduling things a half hour early so that they think it's happening a half hour early when actually it's happening a half hour after they quote-unquote arrive, knowing full well that they will not arrive on time. They'll arrive exactly when it actually starts because they're always a half hour late. Some people even trick themselves. Some people who don't hire life coaches trick themselves and set their clocks ahead. That usually doesn't work because they know they've set their clocks ahead. But you get into some interesting ground. But knowing and understanding your client's needs is where all of this help begins. How about knowing what questions to ask? When you know and understand your client's needs, you will know what questions to ask. Now, this gets into a bigger picture because if you are asking questions about every little thing and then you're asking the same questions over and over, you're not going to be there very long. You need to make sure that when you ask a question, you understand and write down or remember somehow the answer to that question. Because if you continue to ask the same questions over and over, they're going to get the idea that you're really not paying attention to what they're saying. And if you're not paying attention to what they're saying, then you're really not into the job. And if you're not into the job, then why are you there? So you don't want to set up a chain reaction like that. Always know what questions to ask. Now, the other end of the spectrum is that people can be too afraid to ask questions. They don't want to seem dumb. And I've been through a lot of education all the way through the doctoral level. So I've come across this paradox many times. Students who are afraid to ask questions. And they say that the only stupid question is the one you don't ask, but that's not the way students feel in the classroom. They feel that if they ask a question, they're going to seem stupid for asking the question. They think that everyone else knows exactly what the teacher's saying, when in fact, many times, nobody knows what the teacher's saying. And when they have a question, it's a good indication that everyone else has the same exact question. They're just too afraid to ask it. So you need to make sure that you understand what your job is. That means sometimes putting your ego on the line. Sometimes saying, hey, I really don't understand this. I know we went over this yesterday. I know that you feel you thoroughly explained it, but I really don't understand this part of it. Please explain it. Because if you let those things go on, if you just assume that you know what's going on when you really don't, you're going to start making incorrect decisions based on your improper understanding. So you need to make sure in your communication that you know what questions to ask. And that means asking everything that you're not sure of and not asking anything twice. If someone explains something to you, you should understand it. If they haven't, then you need to ask a question. Now this gets back to types of communication. If you have 10 questions, rather than bombarding the person throughout the day with each question as you think of it, how about putting in an email? Say, here are my questions. I have 10 questions. When can we schedule some communication so that I can get the answers to these questions so that I can do my job more efficiently? So there are ways to work within the framework and make everything work.